Hi, in this video we're going to be looking at how to do a simple watercolor painting of an elephant, and I'm going to be adding some details to it with a fine liner. So for this video you're going to need a set of watercolor paints, a paintbrush, water, and cardboard or paper that is suitable for watercolors. Let's get started. So a couple of weeks ago I showed you how to draw an elephant using a grid, and I'm going to be using that elephant for today's video. If you'd like to download a copy of the grid with the picture in it, you can click on the link in the description below, or you can go back and watch our video on how to draw an elephant with a grid and I'll do it with you. So before I start painting my picture of the elephant, what I've done is taped it down to a nice firm board, or this is actually my sketchbook, but it's got a nice firm cover. And what I'm going to do is just put a book at the end to make my picture at a slight angle. So the bottom of the picture is angled down and the top of the picture is slightly raised. Now the reason I'm doing this is when you're painting with watercolors, they move around a little bit. And if you have it at this angle, you can control where the water goes. So the water is always going to run down to the bottom of the page. So it just helps you have a little bit more control over the picture. And again, the reason I've taped it down is so that my page doesn't buckle when I wet it. If you're using a thinner piece of paper, you definitely need to tape it down. Okay, the first thing that we're going to do is mix our washes. Now, when you're painting with watercolors, the paint is based in a water wash. So you take some of the pigment and add it to some water, create a wash, and you paint with the wash. So what I'm going to do is mix the 4 washes that I need first, and then once I've got all 4 colors mixed, I'm going to paint them on the page. Right, so for my elephant, I'm going to have a slightly purple color and a blue color. Now elephants are gray, but often in pictures it looks nicer if you use a bit of purple or blue to show the gray. So what I'm going to do is dip my brush in the water, load it up, and I'm just putting 2 or 3 drops of water. Because I'm doing quite a small picture, this is A5, I don't need a whole lot of water to cover the page. Now this will obviously depend on the colors that you have, but I'm going to use a little bit of my blue. The washes that we're making on this elephant are very light, so that means we don't need to add a whole lot of color. I'm just rolling my brush around in here once or twice, loading it up, so it's called loading it with the color, and mixing it into the water. Now this color seems like it's a bit too bright. What I'm going to do is just get a test piece of paper. Paper or cardboard will do, anything is fine. And just check it out, that's way too bright. So what I want to do is add some more water to that. I'm adding about 2 drops of water. What I'm going to do to make it look less bright is just add a little bit of this browny yellow color. So I'm kind of dirtying the color. Okay, that's a much more grey looking blue. Okay, so this is the perfect color for my elephant. Now I'm going to make a slightly more purple version of this color. So if you don't have purple, I don't have purple, red and blue will make a purple wash for you. So I'm going to first roll my brush in the blue, rinse my brush off because I don't want to put blue paint in my red paint. Roll my brush around in the red. Right, so I'm going to test this color out and see if I'm happy with it. Right, similar to the blue, it's a bit too bright, so I'm going to add a little bit of my yellowy brown color just to muddy it a little bit or make it a bit dirtier. I've added a bit too much here, I'm not happy with this color, so I'm just going to mop it up. Paper towel can be really helpful when you are using watercolors. Just sucks the color right up. Okay, so we're going to try our purple again. We know it's a mixture of blue and red. Okay, that's the color I'm looking for. And my final two washes are just going to be a yellow color for the tusks. So this yellow brown that I have, it's actually called yellow ochre, is the perfect color. So I'm just going to mix it in. If you don't have that color, just use one of your bright yellows and add a little bit of brown to it. Just going to test this color. Right, that color is looking good. So notice how I test all of my colors before I put them on my page. The other reason I'm doing all of my washes before I paint is that I'm going to mix these colors together on the page. That's called wet on wet, when you mix the two watercolor paints together while they're both still wet. And it creates this blurry, dreamy kind of a background. So if you were doing wet on dry, then you would just mix one wash at a time, paint it, let it dry, do the next wash. But because I want all of these colors to blend into each other, I'm going to mix them all first and then I can put them all on the page quickly. Right, so next I'm doing my green. What I'm going to do is add a little bit of my yellow ochre or the browny yellow. Just a small amount, we don't want to add too much to it. Right, I have my 4 washes ready. I'm going to get started. So what I'm going to start with is the back part of the elephant's body. So I'm going to take my purple, his legs and his body are going to be in this purple, and I'm going to go to the darkest parts of the body. So behind the ear here, there's going to be a shadow. So I'm just painting behind the ear. Once you start painting, you need to work fairly quickly because we don't want these paints to dry before we've had a chance to mix them together. Right, so I'm just doing the front of his leg. And then I'm going to go to the back of his leg. Now what I'm doing is just dipping my brush in the water and I'm going over where I've just painted and just rubbing it, and it almost blends it. Now the longer you leave it, the more the paint's going to dry, the harder it will be to blend. And his other front leg, I'm just going to paint that quite darkly too. Okay, I'm just going over the spot again because I want it to be a little bit darker than the rest. Okay, next I'm moving on to my blue. Now, his ears are going to be quite a bit lighter, but on his head here, this spot of his head, almost the center of it, will be the darkest part. Here are the folds of his trunk. And where his eyes. So this is just it's called a loose painting. I'm not really worried about details, and I'm going to add in a few more details with my pen later. Okay, I'm just dipping my brush in the water now, and this paint that I've put on, I'm spreading it over the ears. So I'm blurring those edges so that it's not just this clear line. Okay, I want it to be a bit darker at the bottom of the trunk here. So I'm just adding a bit of extra color. Okay, next we are painting the tusks, our yellow color. And although this is just the section that the tusks are going to be in, I want you to blend that yellow into the background as well. So we want the colors to merge together. And now what I'm going to do is get my green, put a little bit of green here, and let the green and the yellow run into each other. And do a bit more green up here. As you get to the top of the head, dip your brush in some water and just spread that green out. Okay, we also need a little bit of green here between the legs. Now you'll find most of this purple has now dried, so the elephant is standing out, but a little bit of the purple is running into the green, so we're making a nice, just a loose painting. I'm adding a little bit more yellow onto the tusks. If you have a bit more purple left, you can add it in. What you need to be careful of now is just putting too much water on the page and ending up with a big blob. So it can be quite tricky to do these loose paintings because it can look like one big mess if you add too much paint. So you have to know when to stop. Right, now that we've spread the paint around, we're just going to leave our page to dry completely. You don't want to add pen details to a wet page. The pen is just going to run and bleed all over your picture. So your page should be 100% dry before you add these details. Okay, so the first wash of paint that we've put on is now completely dry. If you were feeling really brave, you could mix darker versions of these washes and add details with your paintbrush. But what I found is often when people start painting with watercolors, they get really frustrated trying to do the finishes and the small details with a paintbrush, and then they get despondent about it. So I think sometimes it's nice to start off with just one basic wash and add details with some ink. So I'm just using a fine liner now, and I'm going to add my details in that way. Right, so all I'm basically doing is going over the lines that I drew earlier. Now I don't want to have these big solid lines. I'm doing lots of jagged little lines. And I'm just going over my pencil lines, outlining the ear. Elephants are very wrinkly, so we're just going to add in little wrinkles. If you watch the video on how to draw an elephant using a grid, you would have heard me giving all of these tips. So you can just go over your pencil drawing. Just adding a little bit of dark shading on either side of the tusk. And a couple of lines going down the length of the tusks. Right, and then the same goes with the trunk. A bit of dark shading on the inside of the trunk. When you're drawing the lines, think about the shape that the object is. So a trunk is like a big cylinder, it's round. So you don't want to draw straight lines, you want to draw a line with a bit of a curve to it. And that makes it look more rounded or curved. Add a bit of dark shading on this side. So the more of these scratchy lines you make, the more wrinkly and old your elephant's going to look. For some of these lines, I'm hardly touching the page. For his eye, we're just drawing a triangular shape. Some wrinkles around it. Okay, we want some nice dark shading under the ear here. You don't want to do too much scribbling and totally hide the painting that you've done. So it should just be enhancing the painting. Couple of lines along the back just to show the rough texture of the elephant's skin. Nice knobbly, wrinkly elbow. Right, this leg here at the bottom is probably going to have the darkest shading. It's the most shadowed, or the most in shadow. So as you grow in confidence with your watercolors, you could add more of these details with your paintbrush, show more of the wrinkles. You would want to use a nice thin paintbrush if you were doing that. Right, and there we have our Basic watercolor wash elephant. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and if you have any questions about getting started with watercolors, please leave a question in the comment section below. Subscribe to our channel to get more ideas every week.